Okay, so I did the soil assessment for the Cheatsheet Community Wildfire Protection Plan. My name is Mary Young, and I currently work for the Umatilla National Forest, but I'll be transferring full-time to the Whitman National Forest in Oregon. So just a roadmap real quick. I'll go over the project overview, my role in the project, the needs, the methods, and how these soil methods directly impacted the treatments that we use across the landscape. And then the actions completed. And since this is kind of dense and it's soil jargon, I'm going to provide a cheat sheet throughout the presentation just to kind of refresh, because I know it can get a little confusing. So the Cheatsheet Community Wildfire Protection Plan is located both on the Umatilla and the Wildfire National Forest. So the community of Granite and Greenhorn exist on adjacent private lands near there. And these areas are at high risk for wildfire. So in 2013, there was the Vinegar Hill fire, which I'll go into more details, but it was a 1,300-acre fire. And there's been, since that fire in 2013, there's been a real need to make the landscape more resilient against these high-intensity fires. So the project is 37,800 acres. 63% of it is on the Umatilla, and then 37 is on the Whitman National Forest, and then we have 9,500 acres that are within the North Fort John Day wilderness area. So this is the map of the project. So the blue little dots are the project area. This is the Umatilla, Wallowa, and then the Malheur, which I'm sure you've seen in the news recently. We got a little bit in there. And then you can't really see, but this dark green is actually wilderness area. The white is private property. Yellow is, I believe, BLM, and then blue is state land. So my role with the project is I'm currently a pathways intern for the Forest Service. And so my role in this was to create the existing conditions report for the project for the environmental assessment, which is part of the NEPA process. So I did standardized methods that are used by many soil scientists, particularly what we use a lot in our area, as well as nationally. So this is just kind of a look at the whole process for resources when you're doing existing condition reports. So hydrology is going to be looking at temperature, water quality, stream flow, and those soils we're looking at stability and productivity, and that has to do with mass wasting and landslides is what we're looking for, and then also erosion potential, and then we're looking at water quality and how sediment has an effect on these aquatic species, and then detrimental soil conditions you'll see quite a bit, and so you can see that in change or absence of vegetation on the landscape, and then also the fish biologists also get all that information when it has to do with sediment and hydrology. So here's a cheat sheet. So the TEUI is a Terrestrial Ecological Unit Inventory. That's just basically the soil survey. It's all the different polygons. It has all the information about the soil survey in it. And then I'll talk a lot about soil order. And soil order is basically just the dominant soil characteristics, the geology of the area, and vegetation. So you'll have forested soils or alpha soils, volcanic soils or andisols, and so forth. And then the productivity index basically measures the productivity of vegetation and landscape resilience. So how productive the landscape is, what's the potential for vegetation growth, and then this WEP is the Water Erosion Potential Project. So basically that's just looking at soil or sediment and erosion potential on the landscape. And then detrimental soil conditions is just looking at unsustainable conditions that are present on the landscape. So all these methods I use to determine treatments. Some treatments were changed in the project harvest units. And so a lot of these methods help land managers to not only see what the land's potential is, how we can streamline the process, and how we can save money in the process, and making sure that the landscape is good for future generations. So these are the proposed activities for the project. And I just wanted to note that this little asterisk is where a road cuts between the Umatilla National Forest. Because there's a lot of roads where you're driving, one side's Umatilla and one side's the Whitman. And then also for fire in wilderness area, This number is actually probably not going to be 9,500 acres because the only way we can burn in the wilderness is under completely perfect conditions because we're restricted with permits and what you can actually take out to the wilderness to control the fires. So that number will probably be significantly lower. But firewood is like lodge pole and lodge harvesting where you can get permits to go out and get firewood. Commercial thinning is trees that have market value. And then with commercial thinning, we also do non-commercial thinning. So that's they have no market value, but it's a way for us to clear out understories and provide favorable species within the composition of the forest. Mechanical fuels is like mastication, mulching and big brush heads, or I think it's called, it's like a chain thing that goes through and kind of mulches everything. And that kind of just clears out the understory. And then so roadside treatment is kind of like all of these, and it's also on the roadside. And then non-commercial thinning, while it's also doesn't have a market value, it's also focusing on these ladder fuels, which is fuels that go from the understory up to the crown of the tree. And so the crown of the tree is really where you want to avoid fires, because that's where you're going to have fires jumping lines, and it can become uncontrollable. So this is the map of the project area, and this has to do with prescribed fire. So the red is the prescribed fire zones where we're going to be wanting to burn. And then this is just the Umatilla, and then the Lowman, and then up here is the wilderness area. You can't really see those units very well. So these are our harvest and timber units. So you can see the roadside, these are all along the roads. And then there's all different types of prescriptions and different combinations of commercial, non-commercial, firewood, depending on the landscape. And that's how all those methods have to do with figuring out what treatments are appropriate for what landscapes, for what units. So the need of the project was to create defensible fuel profile zones. So these are actually images of the Vinegar Hill fire that occurred in Oregon in 2013. So these zones are in order to create low intensity fires and reduce those crown fires and spotting. So crown fires are just where like the top of the tree is burning and embers can jump and you can get spot fires. And so this is a picture of the spread. So the blue is where the initial fire was, which was caused by lightning. And I think it took just under a month for us to control this fire. So it spread all the way down. And with the landscape of this fire, it was really mostly controlled by air. Not a lot of hand crews or machines were able to get out there. And so that's why burning and reducing these fuels are so important, because this landscape is just so difficult to control. Okay. So back to the cheat sheet. I'm going to go into the TEUI and then also talk about soil order. And so that's just basically focusing on the soil characteristics. So using the TEUI, we'll have a complex. So each of, so we have a bunch of different units. Let me go back. And so each unit will be a complex. So you have like the snow, Dardrey, and tamarack. This is not actually snow, that's just the name of the soil series. And so there are multiple series within the complex, and they're in order from dominant. So the first soil series within the complex is going to be the most dominant series. And basically, all these series have unique soil order, texture, slope, temperature regimes. And so this is kind of an abbreviated example of what a series would look like if you were to go onto the NRCS website and pull all this stuff up. But next, I'm going to be talking about, I don't think it's actually next, but later on I'll be talking about the productivity index, and all the information you need is this taxonomic class, which is just right here. So this is a map I created of the soil order for the project area. So most of the soils in our project area are andisols, which are volcanic soils. They're at risk of increased soil bulk density and compaction, so we really have to worry about machinery going over this. A lot of fine textured ash caps, which can be detrimental whenever you're trying to work on a landscape. But then we also have alpha soils, which are forested soils. Intersoils, we have like this little dot right here, and that's just a poorly formed soil. We have intersoils, which are recently formed, also well developed, more like a new soil. And then we have mollisols, which is in the orange, and those are soils formed under grassland. So they have a lot of organic material. They're typically deeper and darker in color, and very fertile. Okay, so back to the productivity index. So that's looking at vegetation and landscape resilience. So this is the productivity index that I created. And so now you can see all these little soil surveys. These are all different complexes within the project area. So dark green is very productive, red is very low productivity. And so why this is really important is because you really don't need a lot of information in order to figure out the productivity index. It's an online website that you can put in the orders, grade groups, subgroup, and modifiers, which is provided in that NRCS website, and you can also get that information from the soil survey. But what's unique about the productivity index is when you're thinking about it, so high productivity forests have the capacity to sustain lots of vegetation. But since fire suppression has occurred, we have an unsustainable amount of fuel loads. And so that's like a great reason to burn and to thin out these forests because it's unsustainable. And then you see these low productivity locations and you think, well, why would we need to burn? Or why would we need to thin? But these landscapes historically were never able to sustain a large amount of vegetation. And so they have also been building up fuels over the years. So another method we look at is soil indicators when we're looking at direct and indirect effects on the land. So tree growth, grasses, underground productivity, all has to do with soil productivity. So the next thing that I'm going to be talking about is the WEP, the sediment and erosion potential, and the detrimental soil conditions. So this is the WEP. So WEP stands for Water Erosion Potential Project, which has to do with soil texture and rock percentages. It also takes into account slope, and then it calculates the potential for erosion to occur on that landscape. And so it takes like the dominant soil texture, and that's how you can look at it on a map and understand, all right, a sandy loam is going to be way different than a silt loam, which is going to have much finer texture than something that's going to be really gritty or thick. So this is a graph. So these are the calculations that were made for all these different soil indicators. So we found 51 acres of mass failure, which is due to past logging events where the landscape has been completely stripped of trees. And then whenever you're removing vegetation from a landscape, that landscape no longer has trees to, whenever it rains, those trees are taking up all of that water. And so you have a lot of weight on the soil. And then a lot of these locations where we found mass failure, there was also a road cutting the toe of the slope. So when you load the head and then cut the toe, you're going to create landslide, a lot of landslides. And so then existing detrimental soil conditions, these are mostly found in old trails and roads, skid trails from past logging events. So we calculate 188 acres of detrimental soil conditions. So this top one is the existing condition, and then this bottom table is the no action alternative, which is the same amount of acreage for those two numbers. So here's a picture of an identified detrimental soil condition. You can see this road here compacted the soil enough to where no vegetation is able to grow, and these trees are not able to mature. And then here's a picture of the mass failure sites that we found. Are there any questions? I think I'm at the end. I'm trying to rush through it.
Just want to give you a chance, since you ran out of time, to spend your first minute in the Q&A kind of concluding.
Okay.
Would you like that?
Sure. Well, I kind of wanted to look at this landslide photo because it's pretty cool. And so you can see how the ground has just completely buckled and fallen, and it was crazy to see that. But so the actions that I completed, I finished the existing conditions report. We also cut out about 1,000 acres, or changed about 1,000 acres into these landslide areas. We restricted a lot of timber and thinning projects in the area of influence above all those projects. So if you're removing trees from above a unit, it's going to impact those landslide potential areas below. And then I also calculated the detrimental soil conditions, created that productivity index map, and all of this kind of helps to inform other resources. You don't have to consult a soil scientist to get some of this information, which is kind of cool and new, and hopefully up and coming. Hopefully soil information is not just only available if you consult the soil scientist.
You said you're in the Pathways program, so what will you do next?
So I finish this upcoming August. So I've spent last summer and I'll spend this upcoming summer training with Umatilla, and then I'll become the soil scientist for the Lao women. So exciting. Mary.
So is this process that you've gone through replicable to other areas? I mean, was that the point of your project?
Yeah, so I think most of the methods that I use for this project have been used for many, many projects that are occurring forest-wide and across Region 6, Pacific Northwest. I think the one thing that was really new and unique was using this productivity index, just because other land managers can use it. And I think a lot of people think of soil scientists as someone just like, you know, a hermit with all their information and just keeping it. It's not accessible to everyone. So I think like a big movement with the soil science, I guess, area, the discipline is just to get that information out to the people and have other disciplines use it. And so, I mean, the productivity index can be used for anything, anywhere.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you've interacted with other parts of the NEPA process through this project and what you sort of insights you've gained into NEPA?
So the NEPA process has been pretty interesting. So I'm also in a NEPA class right now, which is very awesome. But I got to work a lot with the NEPA coordinator for our forest and talking to him about how the whole process happens. So we had our initial scoping. I didn't get to make it to any of the initial scoping sessions, but I did get to read all the transcripts from that. And in Eastern Oregon, we had some very interesting scoping sessions. But so we put out our our stakeholders letter, letting them know about all of these, and then we're taking all this information back. We have all these comments that I've received that are really interesting. And so we have to comment on everyone's question, everyone's comment on the project. Every single topic or question has to be addressed by each resource. And so we are in that process of answering all those things and getting our initial EA out there for the second round of scoping.
This is a little bit out in left field, but it seems to me that this whole process could really inform the case for national lands as national lands, as opposed to being transferred to local control, just in controlling fires. Have you looked at making that connection
Between,
well, in, I guess, advocating for national lands being controlled on a national level due to funding, due to work like this, as opposed to being transferred to local control?
Well, and like this area is so rural, it's basically a ghost town, these towns are. So we are the only agency that can control, that are working to do wildfire in this area. I think there might be 8 people in the town of Granite, and there might be 30 people in the town of Greenhorn, which are very small, but our forest surrounds their private property, so our, intent is property and life. And so we have to spend millions of dollars to protect those towns anyway. It's been interesting to see the pushback from those communities and fear of the government. But I definitely do think that there should be more initiation of wildfire and protection plans.